and welcome into the first ever episode of the Pain and Panic podcast. Here I am, Adam Sheetz, joined by my co-host, Chris Reynolds. Chris, we've been really excited to do this podcast. We've had some technical difficulties trying to get our first couple done, but now officially our first episode here as we preview the NFC North and South. Chris, what can our listeners and our fans expect here from this podcast moving forward?
You can expect us two really good friends talking about sports, having some fun comedic conversation, and also probably some good insight, hopefully, depending how this preview goes, and we'll see if it's actually accurate. But, we talked about this years ago doing it, and as you mentioned, we tried. Had some technical difficulties. Now, though, we want our first episode to be one of the very best with everything running smoothly. So here we are, very excited.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun here. Again, we're starting today with our division previews. So we have the NFC North and South in this episode. Later this week, we'll have the NFC East and West. And then next week, we will go into the AFC previews as well. Expect a bonus episode of NBA offseason coverage also coming up in the near future as well. But Chris, as I mentioned, we're starting in the NFC. I think the NFC has a lot of very interesting storylines. We're going to start North and South in this video. We'll start with the North as they were arguably the best division in football last year. They had three teams make the playoffs in the Detroit Lions, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Green Bay Packers, looking to do the same. Now, granted, their playoff success last year was very minimal. Those teams went 0-3 in the playoffs, losing their first games each. But we're just going to go in order from where they put last year. We'll talk about all the teams, then give our predictions throughout the division. But we'll start with the Detroit Lions, 15-2 last year, a phenomenal regular season, but then, of course, flamed out in the playoffs, losing that first game to Washington at home in the divisional round of the NFC playoffs. And ever since, they've lost a lot. They lose Ben Johnson. He becomes the head coach in Chicago, and Aaron Glenn becomes the head coach in New York with the Jets. So how much you lose two coordinators, really hard to replace, especially a guy like Ben Johnson, who had a phenomenal tenure in Detroit. How much does that affect this team here going forward into what is a big season for Dan Campbell? Obviously, they've really started to ascend. This is kind of a huge year for them as they try to take that next step.
Yeah, obviously losing two coordinators is not ideal, and you start to see you kind of have this 1 to 2 year window, which they had the last two seasons. 2 years ago, didn't get it done, and last year wasn't really their fault. They were decimated by injuries, and now you start to lose those big pieces, and I think that's going to be a big adjustment. Their offense was humming last year, and it honestly was great the whole way through. It was really just the defense, the injuries that really cost them, and now you have to figure new things out, and I think they're a team that's very likely to, take a step back just because of how good they were last regular season, at least. So losing those guys, Ben Johnson probably is going to be the biggest name you're going to hear about a lot going to the Bears in the division. So their division's getting better, or at least staying the same. And the Lions kind of, if anything, got a little worse. So tough for them to try to replicate what they did last year.
Yeah, I think you mentioned they had 19 players, I believe, injured last year throughout the season that really hurt. Aiden Hutchinson, obviously, I think the biggest of all of them, when he went out, kind of lost their premier pass rusher. Didn't really have anyone to fill that void either. They didn't have a true number 2 pass rusher for them. But now looking at the team, I think a nightmare scenario and kind of where I see potentially this team going would be, do you remember the 2023 Eagles? They lost Jonathan Gannon and Shane Steichen. They actually started out like 10-1 that year. They got off to a really, really good start, but then December hit. They started to kind of lose themselves a little bit. I think you could really tell maybe they made some wrong decisions with coordinators, and they kind of stumbled out the gate and then lost in the wild card round to Tampa Bay on that Monday night game on Martin Luther King Day. So I think it's just a really hard thing to do, replacing those coordinators, especially a team that they just ran their system so well. I think that was their biggest strength, is that Ben Johnson system. And Jared Goff is one of the best system quarterbacks. Not saying that as a knock, but he just really plays within the system, makes the right decisions every time, does a really good job with it. They have great running backs. Jameer Gibbs, obviously the headliner there. Penei Sewell's really good. The wide receivers, sometimes I think they get overrated. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown's unbelievable, but I'm not as high on Jameson Williams. I think he's a great deep ball threat, but as a true number 2 guy, you never know how that kind of goes. He's also not extremely reliable with some injuries and some off the field stuff. Sam Laporta's been really good for them as well. So they have all the talent, and it's just a matter of how do you bounce back losing those coordinators. And I think the 2023 Eagles, like I said, now you can blame a lot of that on Nick Sirianni. Maybe Dan Campbell will cover up some of those things, keep the morale going, make sure maybe to cover up those holes if the coordinators have a learning adjustment there.
Yeah, threw a lot out there, but as you said, they have Jared Goff, the best system quarterback, as you said, and I think that's a compliment in the sense of he doesn't try to do too much. And I think with the new system, that's going to be difficult for a guy like Jared Goff, who might not be like the Mahomes that can create on his own, or Burrow that can just do anything. He's more of getting the ball to the open receiver or handing the ball off really well and does his role great. And you mentioned the running game was, I think, their strength last year. You had Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, and Montgomery got hurt too. That Sonic and Knuckles as they call him, that pairing. If both of those guys are healthy and they still have a good O-line, that alone is probably worth, like, that offense could get you 8 wins. The defense, though, was a huge question mark 2 years ago. They improved it last year. You said the injuries. And now it's just a question of, can you stay healthy? And it seems like, I hate to say it, but Detroit might just actually be cursed, where they just can never really seem to have that real success in the playoffs. They finally made the playoffs, but really having real success last year, you get the bye, so they at least made it to the second round, but really just because of the bye. They lost to a really good Commanders team that was peaking at the right time. So who knows what was really a product of the Lions' difficulties and what was really just running to the buzzsaw that was the Commanders last postseason.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned kind of Ben Johnson maybe being the bigger coordinator loss, and I think you're right, but I think maybe a lot of people, and this just always happens with defense coordinators, with all the injuries they had on the defensive side of the football, you don't know how much Aaron Glenn might have been covering up. Now, again, we won't know that until this year if the defense, doesn't take a step back at all, and we'll see how the defense works and things go in New York as Aaron Glenn's the head coach with the Jets, but how much was he covering up in those situations as well? But as we mentioned, they were decimated by injuries last year. Like, this team, if they're healthy, they're as talented as almost any team in the league. I think the Eagles you'd probably put ahead of them. The Ravens, maybe some people would put ahead of them. I think ESPN put the Ravens at 1. I think the Lions came in 3rd there. So, like, talent top to bottom. They have the best offensive lineman in the league with Penei Sewell. I mean, they just have so many good things going for them on that side. So when they're healthy, do you think this team that's almost Super Bowl or bust if they have everyone healthy and out there?
Yeah, and there's no reason why they can't win the Super Bowl with this team. They still have Dan Campbell, who's a great head coach, and they have a lot of talent, as you said. If injuries go their way and they get some luck, they could definitely win the Super Bowl. I don't think that's really the question. It's more of coming out of the gate with 2 new coordinators. Can they go off to a good enough start? Because they're in a really tough division. And then beyond that, it's actually having that real playoff win that they haven't really had. They beat the Rams 2 years ago. They beat Stafford, which was great. And they did beat the Bucs that year too.
Yeah.
But really, it's that next level. They really need to have one of those real wins. But when the game kind of gets tight for them, if Jared Goff has to make the throw compared to him, running out the clock with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, that's when that team kind of gets into trouble.
Yeah, I think you said it there. I think when Jared Goff's asked to do more, which he might be this year, we mentioned new offensive coordinator. If things aren't going well, it's usually on the quarterback. You got to cover it up. You're going to have to make some big time plays if the play's not called perfectly or things are just a little out of sync. So we'll see if Jared Goff can take that step that we haven't seen him take yet. He's still relatively young. I think he's in his early 30s, but he's a veteran quarterback, really smart. See maybe if he can kind of hash things out there. But you mentioned the big thing. Last year, I think, unbelievably disappointing. Even with the injuries, I don't think you expected them, not just losing to Washington, but the way they lost to Washington. I mean, the Commanders ran them off the field in that game. Jared Goff was playing horrible, got hurt a little bit, came back. It was a really, really weird situation there when Teddy Bridgewater had to come in. The defense wasn't very good. Jaden and the Commanders were picking them apart. So how much of concern do you have there for a team that, as we mentioned, things are going right, but now your last 2 playoff losses were a game where you had no right losing that game in San Francisco with the way that started. You guys got up big in the NFC Championship game, fell apart, and then you come out flat against the Commanders this year in your home stadium, and you get ran off the field by Washington.
Well, I think they actually had like a good start to the game. There was still hope. The issue, though, was the Commanders never stopped scoring. And the Lions, got 2 touchdowns, and it's like, okay, they're still in striking distance, and then they could not get a single stop. So I think it was really about the injuries last year on defense, and I'm not going to judge that defense until we can actually see them healthy, but that's going to be their biggest question because they put up some points. Their offense looked good, but by the second half, you knew the game was over, and that just was not even a real game at that point. It was just Jaden Daniels' target practice to his players, just throwing them to wide open players. So I don't really want to put too much from that game in my head for this year because it could have just been a bad game. And it's also just an amazing offense against their decimated defense.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that goes into it. As we mentioned, the defense was so decimated. They made some moves. I think they got Zadarius Smith trying to fill some voids there, but it just wasn't able to work out. Especially when they got Zadarius Smith, it's like, okay, you're filling the Hutchinson rule. They got him right at the deadline. But then they had a lot of injuries after the deadline where it's like, well, you really can't add anybody anymore, and you were kind of stuck there. So the Lions, as we mentioned, was disappointing finish to last year, but now an opportunity with bringing all those guys back to try to do it again. Now move to a team that was also very disappointing in the playoffs last year. The Minnesota Vikings, who went 14-3, a phenomenal year. Lost in the playoffs to the Rams in Arizona. It was a neutral site game because of the fires going on in Los Angeles. So you look at this game here in this season for Minnesota, and the big news is, of course, they got rid of Sam Darnold, who had a career year, 40,000 yards, no, 40,000, 4,000 yards, excuse me, 35 touchdowns for Sam Darnold, a career year, but they decide to let him go. They let him go to Seattle, and they're going to roll with their first-round pick from last year in J.J. McCarthy, who's now entering his second year but missed all last year due to injuries. So this is a big move for Kevin O'Connell. I think he's the one who really signed off on this, saying, JJ's my guy. I want to work with J.J. McCarthy. What do we think here of JJ, who's had ups and downs so far to start camp for him in his first year as a full-time starter?
Yeah, I mean, Sam Darnold basically had a career game every single game last year, and it blew everyone away with how good he was, considering he was just another backup quarterback up to that point. But now you saw that game against the Lions, the end of regular season, to get that bye. The Vikings lost, and you could tell they just knew that Sam Darnold won't be that quarterback to get them over the hump. And with JJ McCarthy, he's really young. I mean, not super young for rookie, but he's still a second-year player, and he has a lot of potential, and his ceiling is just going to be higher because you don't really know what he is yet. And even though he's in his first season, he did have all of last year to learn. So I think given that, he's going to be a solid rookie, if you count him really as a rookie, QB. And in Michigan, he wasn't asked to do a ton. I don't really think that the Vikings are going to ask him to do that much either. You still have Justin Jefferson, probably the best receiver in the NFL. If he's not one, he's probably two. And then you look at, they still have Jordan Addison, who's a really, really good number two receiver. TJ Hawkinson is still a very good tight end. Aaron Jones, when healthy, is a solid running back. And then defensively, that he doesn't have to do anything there, but they're going to, they have a solid enough defense where he's not going to have to do too much. So I think JJ McCarthy, a lot of questions about how much did he actually do at Michigan, but he's a winning quarterback. And I think the Vikings want a guy that can get them over that hump.
Yeah, I think you're going to learn something quick with J.J. McCarthy is that you're going to find out right away. I mean, because he's not going to be in a better situation than this year he'll have and throughout this rookie contract. Because if he is really good and they have to pay him, then he's obviously you're going to lose some of the weapons and things like that. But you have, as you mentioned, a top wide receiver in the league, the best wide receiver in the NFC, undoubtedly, in Justin Jefferson. You have Jordan Addison, who's a really good number two. Hopefully he can stay on the field. He's had some off the field issues going on there with him. They have TJ Hawkinson, who's a really good tight end. You mentioned the running backs with Aaron Jones. So they have all these weapons for JJ McCarthy. The one thing you worry, it's not really about the physical. He is going to be asked to do a lot because you mentioned he has all these weapons, but a lot of them are passing targets. And Kevin O'Connell's a passing head coach. Like, they want to throw the football, so he's going to have to make sure he's delivering out on time. I'm sure Jefferson's not going to be happy if he's not getting the ball when he's open and things like that. He's going to have to deal with that pressure and the fact that, as we mentioned, Sam Darnold was a guy that a lot of people wrote off as a bust, and he comes in, Kevin O'Connell takes him, immediately 14 wins, has a career year, and Darnold gets paid in Seattle, and now you look at him, everyone's sitting there like, well, now JJ's going to have to perform. Like, we aren't getting rid of Sam Darnold to bring JJ McCarthy in to have a rebuilding year when you have Justin Jefferson and you have some team-friendly deals for you. So I think that's going to be the big thing for JJ. I love him. I thought he has the chance to be the best quarterback out of that draft class, which is a loaded draft class. I didn't expect Jaden to be as good as he was early, but you have Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Bo Nix, all had promising starts. Caleb Williams, I think everyone still has very high hopes for, but I think JJ's as good as a lot of them. Michael Penix was also in that first-round class as well, and it's just a matter of how fast can he get acclimated to NFL speed, because you mentioned he's been there, but he hasn't had those full in-game reps, so we're going to get to see. I think he played one preseason game last year, had 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, but he looked really good in that preseason action that he had. So now looking at something else we've been talking about. So we talked about J.J. McCarthy there, but can Kevin O'Connell, I mean, we mentioned he's been able to do it with anybody. He did it with Sam Darnold, did it with Kirk Cousins, now he's doing it with J.J. McCarthy. So even if J.J. isn't perfect, he's making some rookie mistakes, is Kevin O'Connell that good of a coach where it's like, you put anyone with a pulse of being a decent NFL starting quarterback, and we're going to win double-digit games no matter what we're doing?
When you look at the best coaches in the NFL, I think Kevin O'Connell has to be in that top tier of guys. With what he did with Darnold, I think we see now he did a lot with Kirk Cousins. I think with, J.J. McCarthy, this is the ultimate, final test for him to really cement himself as one of those top guys. It's him, it's McVay, and you can throw other people in there if you want. I would say Tomlin in there, always getting the Steelers to a good record, even with a terrible team. That deserves a lot of credit. Dan Campbell you could try to throw in there too. But I think in terms of elevating his players, getting the most out of guys that people thought, are solid, but he elevates them to that next level, Kevin O'Connell's there. The main issue for him is just getting the playoff success. That's I think what he really needs to become in that same discussion with a McVay, with a Shanahan, with a LaFleur, if you have them in there as well. So that's really up to Kevin O'Connell. Well, it's not up to him. It's up to JJ McCarthy if he's actually good enough to then really cement Kevin O'Connell as that top guy. But Adam, we've disagreed a little bit, but I think Kevin O'Connell's maybe like a top 3 coach in the league.
I think he's definitely top 10. I think he's an unbelievable coach, specifically offensive head coach. I have a tough time putting him top 3 when you've lost. And we're going to get into his playoff failures because he has some bad playoff failures. It's not even like, oh, he lost to a really good team. Now we'll talk about who he's lost to in the playoffs. But you look at it and it's just, again, you missed the best coach in the league for some reason. You just completely ignore that Andy Reid exists. So that's a very interesting one. Patrick Mahomes wasn't the number 1 prospect coming out of college, and who took him and developed him and turned him into what he is? Okay. But, looking at what Kevin O'Connell's been able to do with offense, as you mentioned, Kirk Cousins, he feels like a guy who would be really good on like an 8-8, 9-7 team to start his career. Like, he's going to put up good numbers, but not a real winning quarterback. O'Connell takes him to 12-5. Thought last year what he did with Darnold was unbelievable. Again, credit to the receivers they have, and O'Connell does a great job scheming guys open and getting those guys in space to make plays and be playmakers. So I think he's an unbelievable offensive head coach. And again, as you mentioned, we're going to get to it now, the playoff failures. He's 0-2 in the playoffs. He's entering his 4th season as the head coach. He's been to the playoffs twice, so he's been really good. As I mentioned, he was 12-5 with Kirk Cousins, 14-3 last year. The only year in between, they had a bunch of injuries at quarterback. Josh Dobbs was playing quarterback for them at one point. They were just throwing anybody at the wall to see who could throw. I think you and I were about to get a call to see if we wanted to play quarterback for the Vikings that season with how many injuries they had behind center. But the playoff failures they had, the most notable one is the first one, his first playoff game with Kirk Cousins. They were 12-5. They had home field. They won the NFC North, and they lost. And they didn't just lose. They lost to the New York Giants with Daniel Jones at quarterback, and they gave up 35-some points. So horrible loss at home. And then last year, you're 14-2. You have the biggest game of your season. Wasn't even the playoff game. I would say they had 2 playoff games in a row because that game against Detroit was for the 1 seed in the NFC. They would have got the bye and home field advantage throughout the playoffs. They lost that game. They did not play well. Sam Darnold probably had his worst game of the season against the Lions. And then they go into the next week, wildcard weekend, against the Rams, and they again completely fall apart, and LA dismantles them, especially the offense couldn't get anything going in that game. So what does Kevin O'Connell need to do? Because now this is a trend. You've had 2 playoff games, and both times you guys have not, it looks like you almost weren't even ready to play, and you've lost games where arguably you had the better team.
Well, first of all, the Giants that he lost to was actually a good football team. In hindsight, it looks terrible because it was Daniel Jones. But at the time, they were a gritty team. But I give you the fact that they did choke that game away. And then the next one, the Lions were a really good team, and the Rams last year gave the Eagles the best run for their money. So I think those were actually very good teams they lost to. The Giants, less of the 2, obviously. But I think when it comes to the playoffs, they need to get that actual drive to win the game. They get them all regular season. They pull off magical wins, and then they get to the postseason, and things get tighter. The quarterbacks, the teams just don't make the right move. They just miss some throws. The next thing you know, it looks like they don't have anyone open, even though they do have a Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and TJ Hawkinson. So something doesn't click in the big games for them. I'm not exactly sure what. The only real playoff success Minnesota's had was against the Saints, which I tried to erase from my memory as a Saints fan because that was terrible for me. So I don't know what they have to do differently. I think they just need some luck to go their way, and I don't want to ever see anything though happen like the Minneapolis Miracle ever again.
So you're going to try to revisionist history this to say that Daniel Jones and that Giants team was gritty and tough. The game after that, they lost 42-7.
They made the playoffs, okay? If you make the playoffs, you have to be a decent enough team. They had Saquon. I think that was Saquon's best year in terms of the fact that the team was terrible and that like the impact Saquon had. Last year he was great. And it was obviously way better statistically, but it's a lot easier when you have a great offense, a great offensive line, and other threats. That Giants team was terrible, and it only worked because of Saquon. So I think in terms of his impact, he carried the team far more than he did last year. It's just what I'm saying. They still had prime Saquon carrying that offense.
So Saquon Barkley had we'll do the NFC East in our next video, but Saquon Barkley had the best running back season I have ever seen in my life.
Yes,
probably
I
ever.
agree.
And you're saying, but he was probably better the year they lost 42-7 in the playoffs in the second round to the Eagles, who didn't even win the
Considering
Super
how
Bowl that
bad
year.
that offensive line was that year, and considering the fact that their quarterback was Daniel Jones, their best receiver was probably Darius Slayton or Isaiah Hodgins, I do think that was the biggest impact, the biggest load that he had to carry on his shoulders, and he did it remarkably well to get to the playoffs. Last year, the Eagles were going to make the playoffs probably either way with or without Saquon, and probably going to win the whole thing. So
Well, last year's team was very similar to the year before team that didn't win the division, and they lost in the first round of the playoffs to the
they had
Bucs.
a lot of issues,
Yeah,
and
so
it
you're
was
telling
not Saquon.
who covered up those issues now that they could be run first. They had to pass
The
a
year
lot more if they didn't
before
have a
that,
running back.
though, you're skipping the year before that when they went to the Super Bowl and lost. And who was their running back? That was Miles Sanders.
Yeah, who ran
So
for 1,500 yards. Yeah.
yes, but I'm just saying Saquon's impact with the Giants that one year was like, wow, he has to break 3 tackles just to get back to the line of scrimmage, and
Yeah,
he did.
he was really good. He also didn't have a great game in that playoff game. He had 1 touchdown. It was like
What did he
it
do
was
in the
all.
Super Bowl, Adam? What
I'm
did
pretty
Saquon do in the Super Bowl?
I'm pretty sure Daniel Jones threw for 300 yards against the Minnesota Vikings.
I'm pretty sure Daniel Jones had a terrible statistical season the year they made the playoffs.
Yeah, but
But
what did he do in the playoff game? We're talking about Kevin
he,
O'Connell. We're not talking about the New York Giants here.
all right, I'm sorry. I'm just saying that loss to the Giants. Saquon was a very good, very, very, very good running back that year, and I think he actually was probably just as good, if not better, than last year. Just the opportunity was very different.
So Kevin O'Connell gets a pass for losing to the Giants. Is that what, and Brian Daboll, who's about to get fired, and all that. So
That first year, the Giants were actually a decent team, is what I will defend him by saying.
all right. I mean, I guess you said he's a top 3 coach in the NFL, and you're
He
saying
is,
he's
and I
going to
think
lose
that
to decent teams in the playoffs.
I don't think it's all on him. And I think the Andy Reid thing that you mentioned, I think Andy Reid's one of the all-time greatest coaches. I
Yes.
just think the last 2 years he's kind of just been like doing some like Madden coach suggestions, just clicking something basic like Mahomes and Kelsey go out there, do whatever. And last year it didn't work. I feel like earlier on they had a lot of fun creativity in their offense, and I feel like it kind of got stale a little bit the last 2 seasons, but it was still working and winning games. But I just don't think he's kind of making wins happen the way these other coaches seemingly make wins out of nothing.
Okay, well, we'll switch topics now because, again, we're doing the AFC next week. We'll talk about Andy Reid, who's still by far the best coach in the NFL, but that's besides the point. We're going to go to the Green Bay Packers, and here's a coach who's a great offensive coach. It's actually a playoff success. Matt LaFleur is out there in Green Bay, and they had a good year last year. They went 11-6. They gave the Eagles a good game in that first game as well. It was closer than the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl were. So it was a solid year for the Packers. It was kind of a weird year, but and the big question is going to be Jordan Love. He had it was really up and down last year. He had some good games, some really bad games in 2024. He did miss those 2 games early after he got hurt in the season opener against the Eagles. But what does Jordan Love have to do to take that leap? Because he seems like if he can take that next step, it seems like the Packers are one of the premier teams in the NFC.
Yeah, I just don't think we've ever really been able to understand how good Jordan Love is. In the beginning, had initial success, and then he kind of wasn't great, but then would have some moments where you're like, that's the guy that you need that could really win games. And then last year, just there are some games you forget that he's even out there, and it just seems like anyone else. So he really just has to be consistently on the field, throwing to the guys, making smart decisions. But it seems like some games the offense just stops working, and it's really hard to tell what's even Jordan Love versus the receivers. I think the Packers have a solid receiving room. The issue is usually 2 of them can't play in a certain game because of injuries. So I think it's a lot for him considering the difficulties with if your receivers are changing every game. So I think he has to put together a solid season overall and not disappear from some games, which we've seen. And the Packers are a very, solid team, and LaFleur hasn't really had real playoff success besides losing.
He's
I think
won
the
a
playoff
playoff game. He's won a playoff game.
Sure, that's not real playoff success yet.
He's been to multiple NFC Championship games.
Hasn't won one, has he?
Well,
but he's still a good coach, and I think that's a very solid offense. Josh Jacobs had a great year last year. We'll see if he could do that again. And if they could actually get some like real healthy receivers on the team, that offense could probably, consistently really be out there, put up a good fight. Because it seems like last year they just had some games where it was either the offense or the defense doing a lot.
Yeah, but I mean, I think they're really, really good. I think Jordan Love. I think the perfect representation of Jordan Love is the playoff run 2 years ago, where he played unbelievable against the Cowboys in that playoff game on the road when they were the 7 seed. The Cowboys were the 2. The Packers snuck in off a late run. Jordan Love was starting to peak in that first year as a full-time starter, and he played amazing. And then they went to San Francisco for the next round, and they had opportunities, and Jordan Love had the really bad interception at the end of the game, and it was kind of like you kind of felt that like, oh, really high highs, and then there's some really low lows that Jordan Love
Yeah.
will get you. And I think the main thing LaFleur's trying to work with him on, I'm assuming, trying to get him to the middle, kind of get to where we're consistently. You'll still have some highs, but the lows aren't as low. And even if the high of highs aren't as high as they can get, it's still going to be a lot more consistent, and you'll know what they're getting. I think that's the one thing. If Jordan Love, as we mentioned, if he can be consistent, you're talking about one of the premier quarterbacks in the NFC as well.
I think the potential's maybe there. I'm not going to totally say that he could be one of the best. I think, best case scenario for him, he is, one of the better quarterbacks you feel better about, but I don't think he's going to really be like the guy in the NFC. I mean, maybe in the NFC North, if Caleb doesn't work out, JJ doesn't really work out, he could be better than Jared Goff, but I'm not going to sit here and think that he has the potential to really like, be the best in the NFC by any stretch. But I think he's a solid, good quarterback, and I think, as you said, it's more about consistency with them. And I think that team just always kind of has, is kind of streaky, at least offensively. So I think that's partially him. It could be other factors as well. It's kind of hard to tell. But with a good coach, another year, and he also last year, second year sophomore slump. So this is the time for him to figure things out.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to go on with Jordan Love. I think there's a lot of excitement there. You're writing him off as potentially being. I said NFC for a reason. Now, he's nowhere near the top of the AFC. The AFC is loaded with quarterback talent, but you look at the NFC, I mean, there's Hurts, there's Stafford, who's going to be retiring soon. Like, Love could be up there in that top 4 NFC court. Jaden Daniels is obviously, of course, going to be ascending. But, like, outside of those guys, I mean, there's a chance he's in that conversation. Like, I'm not saying he's going to undoubtedly be the best in the NFC, but one of the top 4-ish quarterbacks. And that's maybe more it says about the NFC than it says about Jordan Love, too.
Yeah, I think that's definitely more so the case is that. But I think Jaden Daniels, as you said, only going to get better. Jalen Hurts just won a Super Bowl. And then you look, the NFC doesn't have a lot of hope, but there's a lot of drafts coming up, and the NFC teams will be bad. So they're probably going to get some better talent in there. I think Baker, honestly, is better than him, too. I mean, Baker's always like a top something quarterback. Last season was probably his best, at least statistical season, and he just kind of goes unmentioned. But I think Jordan Love will be a solid, good quarterback, at his best. I also think he's going to get to the, in the Green Bay Packers, they had Brett Favre, they have Aaron Rodgers. I think Jordan Love kind of gets lifted with the expectations from that as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Like I said, it's just, I think it was more the weakness of the NFC than how good Jordan Love is that he gets kind of thrown up there, especially because, again, the NFC, it's not the quarterback strong conference compared to the AFC, so it feels like maybe one of those guys who are normally in a year would be ranked about 10 to 15 in the top quarterback rankings will be able to sneak up and maybe make a Super Bowl. But they did something crazy this offseason, Chris. I'm assuming you caught it. They drafted a wide receiver, Matthew Golden. My goodness. If you want to know how crazy this is, the Packers had not drafted a skill position, so running back, receivers, tight ends. They had not drafted one since 2002 when they drafted Javon Walker. So it has been a very, very long time. Now, I'm not that high on the Packers receiver core. I think they have a lot of great number 2 guys. I think they've been missing that number 1. Matthew Golden, I think, has the potential to potentially be that number 1. But how good could this receiving core get? And again, you mentioned this earlier as well. They just have not been healthy at all either.
Yeah, they've seen a lot of flashes from guys, but never a real consistent stretch. And now they finally, as you said, they haven't had a first round skill position pick in a very, very, very long time. Now they finally do. And I think because they do need one desperately, and they don't have the quarterback like an Aaron Rodgers to get the most out of guys later in drafts. So now you get a first round pick, and hopefully he can be on the field consistently. Christian Watson, I think his rookie season ended on a tear. Second season was great, and then he gets hurt, and then he disappears from games. Romeo Doubs has been solid, but he hasn't really been consistently out there. And then who's the last one? They have Reed, I believe. Very good. Jalen Reed, yeah. Very good, but then sometimes he kind of is just someone else might take the spotlight for a game. They kind of do need that number 1 option, and then let the guys around them do what they do best. They're probably a bunch of number 2 receivers. And it's a very good receiving room, but having an actual bona fide number 1, I think, is very helpful and makes things a little bit simpler.
Yeah, I led you astray there. It's Jaden Reed. That was on me. Jalen Reed, Penn State safety. Love the guy, so that's kind of where my mind went first. But Jaden Reed is who we were talking about there. But I think looking at it, I'll pull up the PFF rankings that you have graciously done for us. Chris does a great job with some of the prep for this show. 21st is where they have the Packers. I think that's right because I think it's to be proven. I don't think you can rank Matthew Golden that high right now because, again, see it to believe it. Let's see what he ends up being and some other stuff there. So we'll see what can happen with that Packers receiving core. But I think they also, a lot of those guys, I think a lot of people were really high on, like Romeo Dobbs got off to a good start to his career. Christian Watson, same way. I think a lot of that was Devontae was there for a little bit as well. So it's kind of like, there's a lot of attention going somewhere else. And then maybe Aaron elevated some of them early in their career as well. And Jordan Love kind of has that chemistry with those guys early. So I think that's something to look at. But again, it's what can they do? And the last thing we're just going to touch, I think we've kind of been talking around this, but is this team a Super Bowl caliber team? Because they sometimes get brought up in that Super Bowl echelon. They've been in the playoffs the last few years. It's going to be year 5 of Jordan Love, really only year 3 of him being a full-time starter. Obviously started behind Aaron Rodgers, started his career, and they're kind of getting that group around. They have a good coaching staff. So is this team a maybe sleeper or a team that has the ability to compete for a Super Bowl?
I actually feel like they're going to miss the playoffs this year. I think their defense, they lost Jair Alexander, probably their best guy on the defensive end. As you mentioned, I look at all the Pro Football Focus rankings of preseason stuff because sometimes it's hard to analyze every single player on defense. But 24th ranked defensive line, 19th ranked secondary, and their defense isn't as good as it used to be. And I think their offense has improved a lot, especially with Josh Jacobs being phenomenal last year. I think he's going to have a hard time doing that again. It's hard to get 2 straight good years from a running back. I think that's just how the position usually goes, unless you're, Saquon or Derrick Henry. But their defense isn't as good as it used to be, and that's a very tough division. I think the Lions are, got to be at the top. The Vikings have a big question mark, but they could be very good, and the Bears will be better. That's a lot of games to play against them as well. So in a better division, I think they're going to have more losses, and I think they're a very good team. They'll probably be in the hunt the whole season. It's just I just don't think they're going to, get into that spot.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they miss the playoffs either. I think it's just they're in a tough division. The defense, as you mentioned, takes that back. That's why we're talking so much about Jordan Love here. He's going to have to take that step. They're going to have to be an offensive-focused team. They're going to have to score a lot of points this year, protect the football. Jordan Love's thrown 11 interceptions each of the last 2 seasons, so he's had some turnover problems at times. So it's going to be a matter of doing that, kind of making sure you take that next step if the Packers truly want to be contenders. And now we'll talk about the last team in this division, the Chicago Bears, before we move to the NFC South. So the Bears, 5-12 last year, was a wreck. Eberflus gone, got rid of the offense coordinator. And they bring in Ben Johnson. And Ben Johnson, the hottest head coaching target there was this offseason because of how good the Lions were in the regular season offensively, all the trick plays in that. But now they're pairing him up with Caleb Williams, who a lot of people thought could have been an Pro Bowl caliber quarterback in his rookie season. Obviously didn't work out that way. But now with Ben Johnson, what does that mean for this offense? That they have talent everywhere. The receiving core is unbelievably good. So what do they have the ability to do here under Ben Johnson?
I think they have the ability to be a competent and actually well-running offense, which is hard to imagine after last year. Remember that Thanksgiving game against the Lions? They wasted 20 seconds trying to get the final playoff, and then they lost to the Lions when they could have won the game. Stuff like that probably won't be happening this year. They managed to lose games. The Commanders, that Hail Mary that Jaden Daniels had to win the game, and the defender was waving to the fans during the play, then he ends up tipping the ball in the end zone. They just tend to manage to lose games in maybe the worst way possible. I don't think that's going to happen as much just because they're now, looks like they're properly run and going to be a very solid team. The biggest question mark, as you said, is Caleb Williams, a second-year quarterback who has maybe the potential to be one of that top tier of guys. Just we didn't really see much of it last year. Get a way better offensive-minded coach in there, properly run, should be doing things the right way. And I think they actually have a real chance to rise the most in the NFC because I think they have so much talent and they improved a lot on the offensive line. And I think they had the biggest increase in offensive line as well. It was terrible last year, but they got a lot of guys. They stole Tooney from the Chiefs. They have an actual center now who people seem to like. So I think the Bears are maybe the second best team in the NFC North.
Yeah, I think they made a lot of great moves. I think you mentioned the big thing there that Ben Johnson understands. I think a lot of people talk about all the skill position players in Detroit. I think the thing that ran that team so much was the offensive line. They had a great offensive line, especially led by Penei Sewell, of course. So I think he's realizing Caleb's never going to be Caleb until we protect Caleb and allow him to get time to make those plays. So I think that's where they're investing a lot of their time. They have a good young receiver in Roma Dunze. They got that DJ Moore trade that it still looks better and better every time after they made that trade that number one pick that ended up being Bryce Young. So it's just they've done so many great things there, and they're starting to build. Still, I don't want to say they're too well run because they did extend Ryan Poles like 2031, even though he's still like the on the field success hasn't been there for the GM. So I would have waited on the extension, especially because he wasn't up for one. But they decided to do that. The one thing though is we're going to talk about the defense a little bit of the Bears because Matt Eberflus did not work as a head coach, but he is a good defensive coordinator. Now he's with Dallas. Does maybe they're investing a lot in offense, which makes sense. You hire Ben Johnson, now you're going to be like, okay, we're building around Caleb. Does maybe the defense take a step back? Because the one thing, Caleb struggled last year, but those close games were a lot of times it was in the teens because the defense was sometimes keeping him in it. Or maybe, the defense can still be that good, even though they don't have a defensive-minded head coach anymore.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's a small step back defensively. I mean, their defensive line is average, but they still have a very good secondary. And they're probably, though, going to be asked to do a lot less. Last year, they were asked to keep them in games because, I mean, Caleb couldn't even score his first touchdown for a while. It took him a little bit. So when the offense was struggling, the defense was always out on the field asking to get the stop to try to give the offense another chance. This year, if the offense is actually running smoothly, your defense doesn't have that same burden. So I think maybe they're not going to be overall as good, but I think they should be similar. They didn't lose a ton of guys, and then your job's 10 times easier if your offense is actually putting up points and staying on the field, giving you a bit of a breather.
Yeah, I think I agree there. I think, they should not have that big a drop off. Again, as you mentioned, you never know, but I think I'm with you there. I think a lot of it was the defense played really well. Now they're going to be a little more of a full complementary football team, which should definitely help them out. And you kind of alluded to this about there's always a worst to first team in the NFL. It was surprising last year there wasn't one. The Bears obviously mentioned finished last place in the division. Do they maybe have the potential to be a worst to first candidate? I think they're a popular one because we mentioned the talents there and Ben Johnson, maybe that rookie head coach burst that the Vikings got with Kevin O'Connell when they hired him. So do they maybe have the potential? I know the division's so hard, and I think that might be the one thing that holds them back.
Yeah, I was just going to say that exactly. The division is so difficult to really jump up that much, but I do think they will probably make the playoffs last year. And I think they might have been the worst finisher in the division, but they were actually a solid team. They had a really good start. They just collapsed after that Hail Mary game. They never really had I don't think they even won after that. So that kind of set the season completely off course. But they're a really good team. And I think now they can actually put that talent to use. I think like the Commanders, they weren't, worst to first, but they were pretty negative, looking bad. The Eagles had a great season, but the Commanders spiked up and got way better with their quarterback. And I think Caleb, he should figure a lot of things out, but also a new coach, I think, could have a similar impact on a quarterback as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think they have the opportunity. I think they're going to be better, and we'll just go right into it because we're going to talk about how many teams are going to make the playoffs out of the NFC North. Last year there were three. We mentioned it was the Packers, the Vikings, and the Lions. I'll go first here. I initially had three, and I've went down to two after kind of talking around it. I have the Lions and the Vikings making the playoffs. I'm high on Kevin O'Connell as you are as well, and I'm really high on J.J. McCarthy. I think that team's going to be really good. I don't think they'll be as good last year. They're not going to win 14 games, but I think maybe you drop down to 11-6 or 10-7, which I still think is going to be good enough to make the playoffs, and I think the Lions are probably going to win the division again with the talent they have, and they're my two teams this year. Chris, where are you going to go here with how many teams are going to make it out of the North?
I do have the Lions at the top of the division, so definitely them as one. And I only have one other team, just like you. I think it's going to be the Bears. I think the Vikings have a lot of questions. A new QB, I think it's a lot to ask to try to win double-digit games for a rookie like that. And really, too, that division is so tough. He's going to be playing against the Packers, the Bears, and the Lions, as we've talked about a lot. And Caleb Williams and the Bears, I think, have a lot of hope, as we just talked about. So I think they're going to rise the most. And they have a very good defense and offensive line. Works a lot better with their system. And the Packers, I just don't think their defense is as good as it used to be. And I think they're due for a bad season. So I have those two. And the rest of the NFC kind of did get... there's a lot of teams that should be on the rise, the NFC. So I think that's just going to make it harder if three teams from one division making the playoffs.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. One thing though, I mean, you were really on your high horse about Kevin O'Connell being a top three coach. Now you're like, man, I just don't know what they're going to be able to do anymore. I mean, like, you just you writing them
I
off.
am a huge Kevin O'Connell fan. I don't love their defense, and I think that JJ McCarthy. I'm not a real big JJ fan from college, so I'm not a big college guy, but I'm not gonna act like JJ McCarthy is gonna come in and lead a team to double-digit wins in his first year. I think that's a lot. At least Sam Darnold is an experienced QB. Not like, he wasn't great, but at least he's been around for a while, so I think he can learn from Kevin O'Connell. Where I think a young guy has a lot more to figure out.
Now you're confusing me because earlier you said JJ's not going to have to do too much, so he doesn't have to carry the team to the
He
playoffs.
doesn't have to do too much, but he's coming off a major injury in his first year. I think it
Yeah.
will be the easiest job for him as possible. I just don't know if he could actually do it.
Well, you realize if JJ doesn't work out and he ends up not being as good, Kevin O'Connell's going to get fired, right? Because it was
I
his
think
decision.
JJ will be fine. I think they'll win, around 8 games, just miss the playoffs. And next year they'll be a lot better. But I think they have
All right.
a lot of work to do defensively, and I think it's extremely difficult for a QB in their first season playing to make the playoffs, especially in a division like that.
Yeah, I get it.
Jaden Daniels could do it, but Jaden Daniels also got to play that demolished Dallas team last year and a Giants team that was terrible. They each got to play both those teams
Yeah.
twice.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It was just you're really high on Kevin O'Connell, and now you're like, yeah, but he's probably not going to make the playoffs. I just wanted to make sure we were
And the
there's.
Vikings had a very good year last year, so their schedule's going to be tougher, than a lot of these other younger QBs that usually go to bad
Yeah.
teams.
No, I agree with you. It's just I just wanted to make sure, just trying to check where your brain was there. Just wanted to double check. Now we're going to move to the NFC South. So after we get through the North, we each have two teams in the North. Now we'll move to the South, and we'll start with the team that won it last year and is most likely going to win it this year because this division doesn't have a lot going for them. It's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They were 10-7 last season. They had injury problems as well, and I think the biggest loss they had this offseason was Liam Cohen, the offensive coordinator that did really good, helped resurrect Baker's career there in Tampa. He got him off to a great start. He's now left to be the head coach of my Jacksonville Jaguars. I have really high hopes. I think Liam Cohen's really, really good, but we'll get to them when we talk about the AFC South. But here in the NFC South, how big of a loss is it going to be for the Bucs or Baker now being a veteran quarterback? He's went through so many offensive coordinators in his career, just as the Browns were so horribly run and then bouncing around until he ended up in Tampa. Like, where can they go here with now a new offensive coordinator in Tampa?
Well, I am a Saints fan, and I am done trying to talk myself into the Bucs not winning this division. I think Liam Cohen was a very good coordinator, and I think him leaving, that's gonna be a tough loss. But I think the Bucs always just manage to get things done, and it helps when you get to play the Saints and the Panthers twice a season. And the Falcons team, I mean, they should be better this year, but it's not like they're amazing last year either. So I think they're gonna get a few easy wins. I think that they still have an amazing offense roster-wise. They signed Hassan Reddick. They drafted Emeka Egbuka. It's a very difficult name for me to say, Adam, but correct me if I'm wrong there. Emeka Egbuka. And they still have McMillan, who they got last year, too. So compare the Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. That's a lot on offense that they have. I'm not going to act like they're going to win any less than 10 games this year, because I think last year they lost a bunch of games. They lost Chris Godwin and Mike Evans on offense, and they still won double-digit games. They should be better this year just with injury luck alone. Bucky Irving ended that season on a tear. This team's amazing. They're really good. I mean, they're not even that amazing. It's just compared to the rest of the division, I don't really think there's a world where they could possibly not win it unless Michael Penix comes out and is the next Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going 5. I think if they went 5-1 in the division, that would be expected. If they go 6-0, that'd be nice. If they go 4-2, it's almost a disappointment. Like, you guys lost 2 games in the division. Like, come on now.
Yeah.
Now, granted, things could change throughout the season. Injuries happen throughout the year. But you mentioned that wide receiver core that I think is really, really good up there in the upper echelon of the NFC. I'm not going to say overall because the AFC's got some loaded receiving cores, but in the NFC, you got Mike Evans, who's always going to have 1,000 yards. Got to expect him. Chris Godwin, there's a lot of questions coming off that ACL injury, so we'll see how he comes back. It kills me as a Penn State lifelong fan. Loved watching Chris Godwin play. He had great career. Was off to one of his best seasons ever last season before he tore the ACL, and then they're at an insult to injury for a guy like me to draft a guy who's been torching Penn State for the last 3 seasons in Emeka Egbuka to now probably go and take his place. And Jalen McMillan's been really, really good as well as a number 4 on that team probably this year. So, like, what does this wide receiver core, I mean, they are loaded and they have a chance. Are they maybe the best wide receiver core in the NFC?
I think they're the best in the NFL. I really think that. I think if you can look at the Bengals. I think they have the best 1-2 punch. But I think if Chris Godwin comes back, at least somewhat of the guy he was last season, they should be number one with the depth that they have. The Bengals have the top two guys, I think, of any of these guys with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but their receivers, Mike Gesicki and Noah Fant, that's okay. And, the Bucs have K-Dot, and I think that's probably a wash, but they have McMillan, who I thought was really good to end the season. They drafted another guy, as we said with Aguga, and Mike Evans, you could pencil him in for 1,000 yards. Not even pencil. Get a permanent marker and write it in. They get him that every year. And Chris Godwin, they sign him, so they don't think his injury was that bad if they're going to give him all this money. So I think that, and then Baker could really just throw the ball like really well. He doesn't do a lot of running. He's not going to do anything crazy, but in terms of getting the ball to really good guys, that's all there. So I think they're number one. PFF, I'm not going to act like it's like the Bible of football, but they had him second behind the Eagles, and I actually think they're better than the Eagles receiving core wise.
Yeah, I think them and the Eagles are close. I always forget, throughout the depth the Eagles have, but I mean, it kind of gets weird because they're a run first team, so you kind of forget how good A.J. Brown and how good Devontae is and things like that. So yeah, but I think absolutely they're in that conversation. I would probably, again, you mentioned the depth probably leans Tampa, but when you look at the top two and then pairing them with a guy like Joe Burrow, I think the Bengals probably end up overall, statistically, into a casual fan pulling up, and guys who just play fantasy football probably like, oh, well, the Bengals clearly have the best best wide receiving core. But like I said, I kind of agree with you. The depth they have is really, really special and something
I think their top four is better, but the Bengals have a better top two.
Yeah.
And they used to have Tyler Boyd on the Bengals. Not that he was amazing, but he was just a really good third receiver as well. But he's no longer there because all their money is tied up to T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Joe Burrow.
Well, they better score 38 points. We'll talk about them when we get to the AFC North next week.
At least.
The Atlanta Falcons now we're going to go to next. They finished second in this division, which kind of feels weird that they finished second. No one really talked about them. It kind of shows where the division's been. But they went 8-9, so a solid year. I think disappointing for where they maybe thought they'd be before the season started with Kirk Cousins coming in and things like that. But they went full in. This is Michael Penix's team. He's getting the full offseason with QB1 reps. They've got good weapons, Bijan Robinson, Drake London. Maybe this is Kyle Pitts' year. Who knows? Michael Penix is really high on Kyle Pitts, if you didn't know. They said they're getting him the ball in training camp. But what type of leap can a guy like Penix take here in year two? Because when he was drafted, it was one of the most shocking decisions any team's made in the last couple years in the draft.
Well, I cannot emphasize just how bad Kirk Cousins was at the end of last season. I know he was injured, but it was tough to watch. And Michael Penix seemed like a crazy pick, as you said, but it actually turned out to be a blessing that they got him, because when he came in against the Commanders, they did lose that game, but Penix played great. He was throwing that ball, and that ball actually looked like it was going fast compared to Kirk Cousins, who was the slowest thrower of the football last year. They have a lot of weapons. I'm not going to buy into any Kyle Pitts hype because I'm done riding that train every single year. I get excited, and then he's terrible. But besides him, Drake London's still really good. Darnell Mooney was actually really good last year. And they have a very good team. They have really good running backs. I think they actually could compete with Tampa for the division, but who really knows what to expect out of Michael Penix, because we only got to see him for a little bit last year. But I can guarantee you this: Michael Penix will be far better than Kirk Cousins after those first few games last year. He peaked against the Bucs, threw for over 500 yards. And then the next thing you know, that game he had against the Chargers was the worst quarterback play I've seen from an actual starting caliber quarterback. Maybe Zach Wilson's had worse games, but I don't count him in this discussion. Kirk Cousins was a big free agent. They signed for a lot of money, and he was just floating that ball to the other team. There was one game where Kirk Cousins didn't break 40 miles per hour on a throw, which is just funny because he was the only person that's ever done that in history, getting at least 20 throws, and he just did not have the same zip on the ball at all. Defenders were picking him off like crazy, and just mentally it seemed like he knew he couldn't do a lot, and he just was trying to, and it wasn't working at all. So I'm surprised they even won 8 games last year, being honest, but I think they actually it does. And if you want to say, 2 more wins, it would be Tampa. They could get to 10 wins. I do think, though, Tampa's going to be more towards 11 or 12 wins this year. The Falcons can maybe be frisky for a wild card, but I think they're going to split against Carolina, probably lose both to the Bucs, and then, they're probably going to take both from the Saints. But I think that's, it's going to be a tough division for them because they're just not as good.
Yeah, I think they actually swept the Bucs last year, which I think is weird. They beat them in that big Thursday night game, and then they beat Kirk. I think Kirk started that game, and they beat him in Tampa too. That's why I said we're going to talk about it here. What are they doing with Kirk Cousins right now. You mentioned he signed that 4-year, $180 million contract. They waited. They didn't either cut him or cut their losses or trade him before the new league year started. So now he's on the books for a $40 million cap hit. So now if you get rid of him, you have that dead money for this season as well. But I think someone's probably going to end up calling if they get an injury to a quarterback or things like that, because Kirk's a veteran, come in, learn a system quickly. But like, what are they doing? Because it's also weird that like, Michael Penix sitting there, if he starts struggling, maybe some chirps come out about, oh, why don't we just give Kirk another shot here? Like, it's a weird situation now with Kirk Cousins sitting there. And I think he's a great guy, and I think he's going to embrace, helping Michael Penix kind of bring him up now that he's the backup. But it's really weird that they're just going to let Kirk sit there as a backup quarterback and collect his money. And it did come out today, as we're recording this on Monday, August 4th, that him and Michael Penix aren't going to play in the first preseason game.
I think Kirk Cousins at this point is just a trade piece that they're hoping to move. The issue is no one really wants that contract, and I don't think the Falcons want to buy him out unless they have to. So I think he was maybe going to go to the Steelers, but they got Aaron Rodgers, so no need there. I do think, like you said, if there's an injury to start the year or early in the season, Kirk Cousins will be shipped there almost immediately. The Falcons are probably going to have to pay a lot of that contract, but it is just hard to look at your backup quarterback making millions and millions of dollars and knowing they're not actually that good. And actually, I think Kirk, if he's healthy, could be a solid QB, closer to the beginning of last year. Just, it is tough when you have two guys that could start, the pressure to not lose your starting job, but also to try to win games is tough. Also, I looked, they did beat the Bucs twice last year. I will say the second game, there was no Mike Evans or Chris Godwin for the Bucs. So that was a tough stretch for them, but this team should be better, and I just don't know. I think if they trade Kirk Cousins, that's the right move. If they don't, then there's kind of a weird QB discussion every week with the media going at it. So I think they kind of would let Penix be the guy. But also, Penix was supposed to be drafted later in the draft than he was because of his injury concern. So maybe you think if anything happens to Penix, you still do have Kirk Cousins on the roster. You probably still want him for as much as you're paying him.
Yeah, he was also drafted a weird spot because the one thing like the pro Penix had was he's 25 years old when he got drafted. So it was like, oh, he's gonna develop and things like that. Like he's ready to play, is what I meant to say. Like he's one of the pro ready guys coming out of the draft. They got drafted to a place where we thought he was gonna have to sit for a long time. Of course, Kirk doesn't work out in Atlanta, and now you're gonna have to do it. But as you mentioned, it's really weird having that much money just sitting there doing really nothing except maybe helping Michael Penix, on the iPad in between series. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they handle that. And the last thing to talk about with Atlanta, they have a huge defensive investment going on down there in Atlanta. First 3 picks of this draft were all defense. Edge rushers Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr., they took them both in the first round. And then with their 3rd round pick, they took Xavier Watts, the safety. So they're going full in on defense with Raheem Morris here. And it makes sense. They have young weapons on offense, so kind of let them kind of develop together and now trying to work out this team. I think it's interesting. If you hit on these guys, 2 edge rushers, if they both end up being good, which I think Jalen Walker is going to be good, James Pierce Jr. I think has the potential to be really, really good. You hit on both those, you've now bookended a pass rush for the next 8-9 years that's going to be really, really dangerous in an NFC. So they're taking a swing here, but I kind of like it with what they have on the offensive side of the ball and the fact that it's not a win-now team.
Yeah, that's kind of been the issue in the bookend for the last few years is their defense is just very bad. And they've still been able to win games because their offense, they do have a lot of options, but they had to this year. They finally had to draft guys. People thought last year instead of Penix, they were going to get defense. They didn't. The year before that, they got Bijan instead of more defense, which is fine if you're, if you have Kirk Cousins, you think, okay, but then that didn't really work out. Luckily, Penix seems solid, but yeah, their defense was so bad. It should be better. And the edge rushers, I feel like most of the guys on the edge rushers, guys, I think most of them tend to be good when you draft them early. I don't think there's like a huge question mark, like a quarterback, for example, on their hit or miss rate, but I think they should be better. I think they'll definitely be better in defense. Just one of them at least has to help because what they have now was not working.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing. When's the last time they had a good... their defense wasn't even elite when they made the Super Bowl. That was an offensive team that had to score. It's been a long time.
They did not get a stop in that second half.
No, they didn't. No. And they also insisted on throwing the ball. Kyle Shanahan, everybody.
I would have put Julio Jones into the game as a cornerback because I would have been so desperate to not choke that game away.
Dude, just run the ball. Oh, man. It's just...
That's also a simple solution.
Yeah, poor Falcons, man. Poor, you feel bad for him sometimes because they'll
I
never
don't.
live that. They'll never live that down. I mean, it's
No.
disappointing. I mean, that you gotta be. We'll talk about your team here because if you're gonna make fun of the Falcons fans, I'll back them even though I'm not a Falcons fan. But we'll go to the Carolina Panthers now. 5-12 last season, but one plot. If you're trying to find a positive from Carolina, is Bryce Young got better at the end of that season. He played really well against the Chiefs at the end of the year. So you saw some improvement from a guy who was really on a dangerous trajectory of being a huge bust and one of the worst first overall picks ever, not just because of the way he played. I think he hasn't played like the worst first overall pick ever, but also what you had to give up to go get him. But again, he had a decent finish to last year. So what can you say? What can we say here about Bryce Young maybe getting somewhat better, maybe somehow coming a serviceable quarterback?
Yeah, the week 1 game, Saints versus Panthers, that was one of the worst games I've seen from a quarterback. Bryce Young was completely lost, didn't really know what he was doing. He let the Saints look amazing, which was rare for last season. But by the end of the season, I'm watching him, it did not look like the same guy at all. He just had a very different way about him. The way he was throwing the ball was a lot better. He's still very small. That's obviously always going to be an issue, but he looked a lot better. The team seemed to have somewhat of an identity, and they put up a lot of close games. I think they're going to have a similar record this year, but they're going to look a lot better. Their losses won't be as bad. And I think they have a lot of good options running back wise. They have a bunch of solid running backs. Maybe one pops, or maybe they just have a nice committee of running backs. And they drafted a wide receiver to try to give as many options to Bryce Young as possible. So I think this is, the year you're going to be able to see, was that just a flash in the pan, or is Bryce Young actually a potential real starting quarterback for the team?
Yeah, I mean, they invested weapons. They got Ted McMillan this year, who a lot of people thought might be the best wide receiver prospect. Some people said like Travis Hunter would have been a better receiver prospect, but they didn't know offense, defense, what was going to happen there with how they were going to use Travis Hunter. But Ted McMillan was a really good prospect out of Arizona. They traded back into the first round last year to get Xavier Leggett, who, didn't do much this past season, but again, is a first round pick. Maybe there's some upside there, especially now being a number 2 wide receiver instead of being drafted to potentially be a number 1. Not going to spend too much time on the Panthers. I think a lot of it is just, is Bryce Young going to take a step? Even if you're not winning games, like, is it like we can see a future with Bryce Young as a starting quarterback in Carolina? The end of last season is promising to see maybe if they're going to be able to do that. Now we'll move to Chris's team, the New Orleans Saints, who went 5-12 last year. Derek Carr is retired due to a shoulder injury, so it's Tyler Shuck or Spencer Rattler. According to early camp notes, Spencer Rattler is winning that battle. Tyler Shuck is not off to a great start in camp, but he's young, he's a rookie, so you never know. Maybe he'll be a strong.
He's not young. He is
Yeah.
not young.
Well, he's not young. He's been there for a while. He might have. I think he played at Purdue for a little bit. He might have been there when Sean Clifford played at Penn State. That's going to show how old he is. But yeah, he didn't even start. David Blau was the starting quarterback for Purdue in that game. But yeah, he's a rookie, so maybe he'll figure it out as camp moves on. Spencer Rattler wasn't horrible at times.
He was horrible.
At times he had some flash spots. He was never good, but there were some times where it was like, okay, he's okay. Like for a bad team starting quarterback, maybe. But Chris, I'll ask you this. I'm going to let you rant since this is your team. Is this the worst team in the NFL? Like, are they the worst team?
I do think this is going to be the worst team in the NFL. I think they actually have some still good pieces around them. I think that defense honestly isn't even that bad. The defensive line is bad, but I think they still have a solid defense and some older players on that end of the ball. And on offense, they still have Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Alvin Kamara. They're really improving their offensive line, which inspires hope. What does not inspire hope is that one of my favorite reports from training camp the other day was all 3 quarterbacks of Tyler Shuck, Spencer Rattler, Jake Haener all got valuable reps in. ... None were promising, or like none looked good. So all the options are bad. I wouldn't say Spencer Rattler is winning the quarterback battle. I would say that Tyler Shuck is just. I would say that none of them are winning it. They're all just kind of losing. So which one loses the least? Apparently, Tyler Shuck yesterday had one of his best yet, which I'm sure the bar was low. But I think the team could win 4 games in like a really good scenario, but I don't want them to. They need to embrace the tank. They have been trying to do both of rebuilding some guys while also holding on to the top guys. And it's stuff like Kamara should not be wasting the end of his prime here. I love that man, but I don't need to see him sitting on the bench just kind of like getting 12 catches a game because they can't do anything else. It's just ridiculous. Chris Olave is out here getting injured every game because quarterbacks can't throw him the football safely. It's terrible. Rashid Shaheed is running 30 miles a game, just running straight down the field, catching most of the time. If they can actually throw him the ball, it's just a really bad situation. They need to embrace a tank. They haven't really done a good job. From the moment Drew Brees retired, they have not done a good job. That's just a matter of fact. They have not really found a clear vision for this team. Sean Payton literally had to retire to leave it, and I don't blame him. I'm hoping, though, Kellen Moore will be a better coach. The offense, I think the offense was fine last year when it was healthy, but in Derek Carr, I do feel bad that he got hurt, but I also am happy that the Saints don't have to pay him all this money. Same thing with Tyrann Mathieu. We're not trying to win games. Let them retire, save the Saints some cap space so that they're not paying a luxury tax for a team that's maybe the worst in the NFL.
Yep. You hit all the points. I'd start Tyler Shuck to at least maybe see if the day 2 round quarterback, can figure it out and maybe he's okay. And then maybe you can trade him. You never know. If he ends up being okay, maybe another team will be like, we'll take a chance developing him. And then you can draft your quarterback next year, whether it be a guy like Drew Aller or the guy I think a lot of Saints fans should be rooting for. They had a guy named Archie there once, and there's a guy named Archie sitting there in Texas. So there's a guy.
I don't think, though, they really want to that because they were so bad with the original Arch Manning that they couldn't even do anything because it wasn't even his fault. Just the team was so terrible because the Saints are historically one of the worst teams in the NFL.
Could you imagine if Archie tries to pull the Eli and says Arch won't go to New Orleans? That would be crazy.
I will say, I actually don't think it's that bad for a rookie quarterback because they actually improved their offensive line a lot. Mm-hmm. They drafted offensive linemen with their first picks the last 2 years. That's definitely going to help at least a little bit and that wasn't even like a huge issue for them. Their defensive line is ranked the worst in the NFL. Their quarterback's ranked the worst in the NFL. But they still have good receivers. They have a good running back, and they have a decent, okay secondary with good linebackers. Demario Davis is about 85 years old, still making tackles.
Yeah, it wouldn't be off situation. It'd more be Archie going, I remember what they did to me, man. Yeah, we're not putting Arch through that. Even though completely different situation, but it'd be kind of ironic if Archie goes, my son's not playing for my grandson's not playing for my old team, okay?
Yeah, this is like the opposite. Usually you think, we had the father draft the son in like a LeBron Bronny situation, same family. However, for Archie Manning, he should not want to go to the Saints because of how disastrous the Saints were back then. I think, though, they're a lot more properly run now. I think they actually have signs of hope if they could just get a quarterback. But Derek Carr has not been great, and the rest of the offense usually gets hurt, and he usually is kind of to blame for that. So I don't know. I think it'll be I hope they actually get Drew Aller because I do like Drew a lot, but they don't really seem to draft a lot of Penn State guys. Penn State usually, tends to be like in the Northeast a little bit. The Saints had some chances. I'm always hoping for a Saints guy or for a Penn State guy, but they usually stick to different people.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, we'll see. Drew's got to have a good year, and hopefully he'll be near the top of that draft. Rooting for him, of course, as a Penn State fan. But I'll move. We'll just go real quick. I think we both have the same here. How many teams make the playoffs out of this division? They had one last year. It was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'll go first. It's going to be Tampa Bay again. How about you?
Same for me. Maybe Atlanta can make it interesting, but I think it's clearly just the Bucs at the top, and I think only one can make it from this division because the East should be better, the North should be the same or better, and the West, if anything, should be better as well.
Yeah, the only chance they have of getting 2 is if the bottom 2 teams in this division are so bad that the top 2 have the opportunity to just pick up random, like they can each go 4 easy wins. That would be the only chance they have of getting 2.
I think the Falcons lost 1 to the Panthers and the Saints last year, which is kind of crazy. Yeah. So I think you do have to beat the bad teams to actually make the playoffs in this division if you're not the Bucs.
How about this? The Falcons lost a game to the Saints and they lost a game to the Panthers, but they beat the Eagles in Philadelphia.
They beat the Eagles in Philadelphia and beat the Bucs twice. That is just the opposite of how everything should work in this universe. But that's partially football, but I think it's also partially just who the Falcons were last year.
Yep. Exactly. All right, so that's going to do it here for our North and South preview. Later this week, I believe on Thursday when we upload this, it will be the East and West when we'll finish up the NFC and have our official NFC Championship prediction and who's going to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. That's going to do it here for the Pain and Panic podcast today, so please make sure to subscribe to all of our channels here on YouTube or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as all our social media pages, the Pain and Panic podcast link in the description on YouTube. Chris, you got anything to say before we get out of here?
Yeah, check out the social media. We're going to be posting some reels, as you mentioned, Pain and Panic podcast on Instagram and TikTok and on YouTube as well. We'll be posting the shorts there.
All right, thank you for listening and have a fantastic day.